Kyle turned his back on his family, but his wife Ruth and brother Peter are begging to save him. The autumn sun had sunk beneath the horizon line, casting a golden hue over the town of Willow Creek. Crunched leaves betrayed her steps as Ruth hastened down the street, her heart beating in a mashing rhythm. She was running late for dinner, which she had long dreaded all week. Inside, something was stirring in the house. Peter was already seated at the dinner table, his face etched with tension. Joan flitted about the kitchen, pretending everything was just how it should be. "Where's Kyle?" Peter asked, a frustrated tone to his voice. Ruth took a deep breath and pushed the door shut behind her. "He's running late. You know how he gets with work." "I thought he promised he'd be here on time. It's not like this is just any dinner," Peter shot back. "It's fine," Ruth replied, attempting to calm him down. "Let's just enjoy the evening." But she was nervous. Kyle had not been himself lately, and things between them had seemed fragile. Their financial struggles had been looming over them for so long that they would weigh heavily on the family gathering. When dinner was served, Ruth felt a sense of dread. Everything was tense. Peter and Joan exchanged worried glances at each other, sending worried signals about Kyle's absence. "Maybe we just forget," Joan said finally. "No," Ruth said too loudly. "We can't let traditions die." "Family?" Peter repeated, acid creeping into his voice. "Is that what you call this? A family that can't even be honest?" The churn in Ruth's stomach became worse. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "You know exactly what I mean," Peter said. "Kyle's avoiding us. You can't pretend everything is fine." Ruth clenched her jaw, her heart racing. "He's just stressed. We all are." "Stressed?" Joan cut into her. "Or hiding from the truth? You can't keep pretending everything is fine." Ruth's anger flared, but deep in her chest, she knew they were right. Kyle had been cagey about his work, and their financial situation was careening out of control. They'd been trying to keep up appearances, but the reality was far from glamorous. He was only just beginning to get annoyed when the door opened suddenly. Kyle entered, dripping with rain. "Sorry, but I got waylaid," he said, utterly exasperated. Ruth said, "I was beginning to worry about you." "Yeah, well, I'm here now," Kyle shot at her, hanging up his jacket. He slumped back into the chair, looking away rather than at any of them. "Do you even care that we're all here waiting for you?" Peter challenged. The air grew thick with tension as Kyle shot Peter a glare. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with." "Then talk to us. We're here to help," Joan urged. Kyle sighed heavily. "I can't just wave a magic wand and fix everything. I'm trying, but it feels like I'm failing." Ruth reached for Kyle's hand, hoping to calm him. "We're all in this together." But Kyle jerked away from her. "You don't get it, Ruth. You know not what I'm living through." He got up from the chair. "Where are you going?" Ruth asked herself, panicked. "I need some air," Kyle replied, storming out of the house. The room was silent. Ruth felt the despair swamp her. She wanted to scream, to shake some sense into Kyle, but could only stand there, feeling ineffectual. A few minutes later, Peter sat up. "We can't let this go on like this," he said, sitting up and taking Ruth's hand. "I worry about him, Ruth. He's drowning." Ruth swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do, make him talk?" "But you have to try," Peter insisted. "This isn't just about you, it's about your kids, your future." The pressure was oppressive. Tears pricked at Ruth's eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. I'm scared we're losing him." "Well, then we have to do something, tonight," Peter declared. "We have to find him before it's too late." Ruth nodded, determination filling her. "Okay, let's go." They drove through the rain-soaked streets, tension thick in the air. Ruth's heart raced at the thought of what could happen to Kyle. They pulled to the local bar. the neon lights flickering in the downpour. "This is it," Peter said. "Let's hope he's in there." Ruth stepped inside, her heart pounding. The atmosphere was loud and boisterous. In the corner sat Kyle, a half-empty glass in front of him, his eyes glazed over. "Kyle!" Ruth shouted, rushing toward him. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" "We were worried about you," Ruth cried, grabbing his arm. "You need to come home." "I don't need you to tell me what to do," Kyle shot back. Tears began to spill down Ruth's cheeks. "I'm afraid. We're afraid." Peter stepped forward. "You're not alone, Kyle. You don't have to face everything by yourself." "Just leave me alone," Kyle shouted, slamming his glass down. "I'm tired of all of this." Ruth stepped back, her heart racing. "Kyle, please. We're here because we care about you." But Kyle simply laughed bitterly. "Caring doesn't pay the bills or solve my problems." "Then let us help you," Peter exclaimed. "You don't have to carry this weight alone." Kyle looked at them, agonized. "I don't want to be a burden. I can't keep dragging you down." Ruth came forward, her heart aching. "You're not a burden. You're our family. We love you." Kyle's face relaxed, and then he shook his head. "I don't know how to be happy anymore." Kyle finally broke his silence after such a long time and spoke with a voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to feel this way anymore. I'm tired of fighting." Ruth's heart went out to him. "Then let us help you." Kyle looked at her, his eyes flashing with vulnerability. "What if I can't change?" he asked. "What if I just keep failing?" "You won't know unless you try," Peter said. "But you have to let us in." As he sat there, tears spilling down his cheeks, Ruth's heart shattered. "Please, just let us help you," she said. Just then, however, Kyle's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it and froze. "It's my boss," he said, shaking. "He is going to fire me." Ruth felt a wave of panic. "No, you can talk to him, explain what's been happening." Kyle shook his head. "I can't. I'm not strong enough." "Then be strong for your family," Peter shouted. "You need to fight for your job." But Kyle just sat there staring at the phone in a daze. A few minutes later, Kyle finally responded to the call. "Hello? Yes, it's Kyle." His voice was shaking, and Ruth waited with bated breath. A few minutes passed, and Kyle hung up, relief and despair lining his face. "He's giving me another chance. But if I screw up once more..." There was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Then let's not let that happen," she said, reaching for his hand. "We'll figure it out together." "I don't know how to do this," Kyle admitted. "Then we'll take it one step at a time," Peter suggested softly. As they walked out of the bar, a resolve formed within Ruth. They had far to go, but were finally facing the storm together. For the following weeks, Kyle attended counseling and support groups to sort out his demons. Ruth was steady in her support and love for him, while Peter could once more glimpse a better tomorrow. When things were getting more stable, another storm was gathering on the horizon. One evening, Peter received a call from Ruth, whose voice was full of panic. "Peter, I need you to come over. It's about Kyle." "What's happened?" Peter asked, dreading the answer. "There's been an incident," Ruth said, trembling. "We're afraid for him." Peter's heart was racing. "What happened?" "They've been arguing a lot lately. It's getting worse, and I'm scared they'll fall back into those old habits," Ruth confessed. Peter's stomach turned. "I'll talk to them. I'll see what's happening," he promised. Tension filled the air when he arrived at Ruth and Kyle's house. With a pale face, Ruth paced up and down the living room. "Peter, what shall I do? Kyle's been distant again," she said as she sobbed. "Have you talked to him?" Peter asked. "I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. He kept saying he was fine," Ruth cried. Peter sighed. "You have to see him. He needs to know you are there for him." "But I'm afraid. What if he attacks me again?" Ruth cried. "We'll face this together," Peter said to her. "You're not alone." As they dialed the number together, Peter felt that this would be their future. It was the moment of change, the possibility of healing, or further ruin. Months passed, but Peter watched Kyle dismantle his demons. Regular attendance at meetings earned him a sense of family support. Shadows were lighter in the air, but a part remained. It was the night to break this fragile peace. A phone call from Ruth, panic filled her voice. "Peter, you gotta come over here. It's Kyle." "What do you mean?" Peter asked, his heart racing. "It's not good," Ruth said. "He's drinking again, and I don't know what to do." Peter's panic stirred in him as he rushed to their home. On arriving there, Ruth was waiting outside, her eyes fearful. "Where is he?" Peter asked. "Inside," Ruth whispered, barely above a breath. They went in. The tension was thick in the air. Kyle sat on the couch, staring at the wall as if that were the game he had lost. An empty bottle lay on the table. "Kyle?" she whispered. He turned her way, looking puzzled. "What are you doing here?" "We were worried about you," Peter said. "You need help." Kyle's face turned dark red with anger. "I don't need your help," he yelled. "Well, what do you want?" Peter shouted back. "You are throwing everything away." "I'm good, I can do this by myself," Kyle snapped. By drinking? By pushing everyone away?" Ruth pleaded. You cannot keep doing that." But Kyle just laughed bitterly. "You don't understand, do you? I am already lost." He felt the emotions boiling inside him as he blurted, "Kyle, you have a family who loves you. You're not lost, unless you choose to be." Kyle shook his head as if in response, allowing tears to gush from his cheeks. "I don't know how to get found again. I don't know how to fix this." "Then let us help you," Ruth cried, reaching out for him. "We want to see you happy." But Kyle drew back, his entire body tense. "I deserve nothing. I've messed everything up." Peter came forward. "You're not a failure. You're just struggling, and we're fighting with you." The room got very dense with feeling as Kyle finally broke. He sank to the floor and dug his face into his hands. "I am scared," he said. "I'm so terrified I am going to fail again." Ruth kneeled beside him, embracing him with her arms. "You are not alone," she whispered. "We are all afraid, but together we can face anything." With Kyle breaking into her arms, Peter had a glimmer of hope for the first time. Maybe this was the turning point they had all been waiting for, a chance to rebuild their family. Days became weeks, and Peter continued watching as Kyle started to admit his demons. This man began attending meetings regularly, advocating support from family members. The air felt lighter, but shadows lingered. And then came the call that changed everything. "Peter, you need to come over. It's about Kyle," Ruth said, a quiver in her voice. Peter ran for their house, his heart in his chest. She had already seen him when he arrived. Her eyes were filled with fear. "And he's gone," she said, her voice breaking. "What do you mean gone?" Peter asked, as panic started rising inside his chest. "I don't know. He left a note saying he needed to clear his head, but I'm scared he will slip back into his old ways," Ruth cried out. Peter's heart sank. "We have to find him. He can't do this alone." As they circled the streets looking for Kyle, the burden of their history weighed upon them. They cruised down familiar streets, memories flooding them with which they had laughed, felt warmth, and even the bond that had kept their family intact at some point. Finally, they drew up to the park after all. That was where they had spent such a wonderful time, of course. They both looked around the place for Kyle. And there he was, sitting on the bench on the other side, staring out into space. Ruth hastened toward him. "Kyle!" she shouted as relief washed over her. He looked up, confusion mingling with sadness in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" "We worried for you," Ruth stammered, her voice trembling. "You can't keep running from us." "I don't want to feel this way anymore," he admitted. "I'm tired of fighting." "Then let us help you," Peter urged. "You are not alone in this." But as they stood there, a shadow passed over Kyle's face. "I don't know how to be okay again. I've lost everything." Ruth moved in, tears falling down her face. "No, you haven't lost everything. You still have us." But Kyle shook his head, his face blank. "I don't deserve your help. I've made too many mistakes." Peter realized how deep Kyle's despair ran. "You can't give up on yourself. We believe in you." But Kyle gazed away, trapped in thought. "What if I mess up again?" Ruth stretched out to him, wringing her heart. "You won't know unless you try. Please, Kyle, don't let this win." Before Ruth could say a word, Kyle took off into the park's darkness. "Kyle!" Ruth screamed, her heart racing. Peter followed hard on his heels, panic clawing at his throat. They shouted for him, but he was swallowed by the night. When they finally reached the park's edge, Ruth collapsed, sobbing. "What if he's gone for good?" she screamed. Peter knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her. "We'll find him," he said, voice steady. "We won't give up." But down deep in Peter's chest, a sense of dread washed over him. They could only hope Kyle would choose to come back. Weeks developed into weeks, and Kyle didn't return. The weight of his absence seemed crushingly heavy to Ruth as she tried to find a comfortable solace to rest with him. They had fought so hard to bring him back that now they lived in haunting uncertainty. As Thanksgiving approached, Ruth felt far from the warmth of family gatherings. She spent her days worrying, replaying every moment that led up to Kyle's disappearance. Finally, one evening, Peter got a phone call from a friend who claimed to have seen Kyle. "He is at the downtown bar," the friend said. "I think he is drinking again." Those words hit Peter like a dagger in the heart. He told Ruth all this, and they rushed to the downtown bar, filled with the hope and fear that came with such an encounter. When they entered, it was loud. They saw Kyle slumped over on the bar at the far end with a half-full glass in front of him. "Kyle!" Ruth shouted, running over to him. He looked up, and surprise flickered across his face for a moment. "What are you doing here?" "We were worried about you," Ruth cried, desperation spilling out of her voice. But when Kyle stared blankly at them, they saw the cost despair had exacted. "I don't want to talk," he muttered. "Oh, please, Kyle, don't do this," Peter begged. "You have to come home." But Kyle shook his head, pushing them away. "I'm tired of fighting. I just want to forget," he said. Ruth's heart cracked. "You don't have to face this alone. We love you." For a minute, Kyle stopped, but then the dark closed in again. "I do not want your love. I want nothing." With that, he left Ruth and Peter standing there, shattering their hearts. Out of the bar, Ruth felt despair. They had fought for Kyle to the point of near insanity, but he chose to drown in his pain. "I don't know how to fix this," Ruth sobbed. Peter wrapped an arm around her, but the moment's weight was too much. "We did everything we could. We can't make him change." Ruth nodded, but the ache was unbearable. "I just wanted my family back," she whispered. Autumn leaves rustled as the autumn of life spread its cold gray shroud. They had tried to salvage Kyle, but he had slipped through their hands like sand. The darkness of addiction had enthralled him, and they had had to gather the scattered pieces. As they drove away from the bar, Ruth glanced back one last time, hoping Kyle would turn around to find his way back. But as night deepened, shadows grew darker and despair crept up. Ruth and Peter did their best to live in the new reality. They kept finding ways to support each other. However, Kyle's absence weighed very hard on them. The holidays loomed each week, followed by the lack of a warm family feeling. Ruth would often sit at the dinner table and stare at the empty chair, its silence echoing within the room. Love cannot fill an empty space left behind by Kyle's choices. She sat alone in the darkness and waited. Night after night, her mind replayed the same chapters of laughter and joy, bittersweet reminders of what once was. She wondered if Kyle would ever find his way back home, or if they had forever lost their love.